Hi everyone. As you know, I'm Elena of Elena Reads. On Friday, I will be celebrating 4 years of having my blog. On my blog, I review books and I interview authors and book lovers. Now I've decided to incorporate video interviews. I'm excited that my first guest is Jerry Kraft. Welcome, Mr. Kraft.
Thank you. Happy 4-year anniversary.
Thank you. Jerry Kraft is an American cartoonist. He has illustrated several books, but his most popular is the one he wrote himself, which is a graphic novel called New Kid. It won the Coretta Scott Award and the Newbery Medal. I'm super excited to be talking to him today. So, first of all, what inspired you to write New Kid?
So with New Kid, I just wanted to do something that was different, especially for kids of color. I was a big fan of Gene Yang, who did American Born Chinese, and Raina Telgemeier, who did so many other books, and Victoria Jameson. But I never really saw kids of color, especially African American boys, in that kind of that same universe. And I just thought that it was something that kids would be interested in, just to kind of see a different perspective, and also to have something with boy characters that was like humorous, and also with African American characters that was humorous, because so many of the books that are geared towards kids of color are about history, or kind of a struggle, and they're important books, but I just wanted to have something a little bit more lighthearted.
Yeah, I agree. I actually reviewed New Kid on my blog and I loved it. I realized that how ridiculous stereotypes can be and how hurtful they are. Is that what you were hoping readers would notice as well?
Yeah, there's so many things that it's like a learned behavior that it would be great if we could unlearn them,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, especially with kids, because school is hard enough without someone mispronouncing your name or getting you confused with the one other Asian kid in your class,
Yeah.
or thinking that you're Mexican and you're really Nicaraguan, you know. So I just really wanted to do a book that first was entertaining and humorous, but then let it seep in. It's like, oh my goodness, I did that to someone. I always call, you know, someone by their wrong name, or I confuse them with the other black girl in their class or something like that. And then you start to be conscious of it. And then it just to build something that would build more empathy,
Mm-hmm.
that would just make school a nicer, better place and more comfortable for everybody.
Yeah. What character do you think is most like you in New Kid?
Well, I think Jordan is most like me because he's based loosely on my life. So
Mm-hmm.
the house where he grew up was the house where I grew up. It's a brownstone in the Washington Heights section of New York City. I always loved to draw. My parents did not send me to art school the way I wanted. They sent me to a school in Riverdale, prestigious private school called Fieldston, where I was one of the few kids of color. So all of that is basically my life. And then I exaggerated. But then when I had two sons of my own, I got to see them navigate those same kinds of cultures. And that's where I got the little nuances, like the salmon shirts and the sky blues and the sea moss greens, and calling even teachers by their wrong names, which wasn't anything that I ever experienced. Or the teachers saying, your son's not going outside, he's being antisocial. And
Mm-hmm.
I asked my sons, like, Dad, it's too cold outside. So there's a lot of things like that that is from them, but the basic part, the basis of it all is my life. Plus, I was always one of the youngest and the smallest kids in my class until I was almost a high school senior.
That's really interesting. You didn't like to read when you were a kid, and a lot of the kids I know like to gravitate towards graphic novels. Is that why you made your books graphic novels?
Yeah, I wanted to do something because my teachers in seventh and eighth grade would take our comics because they thought that it wasn't real reading, and that they would, rot our little brains. So they thought that they were saving us. But reading is reading. And I think that something like a kid will pick up New Kid and look at all the color and the fun pages and things like that, as opposed to sometimes just looking at a book that is just all prose. Um, and like me, I didn't see any characters that were like me. I didn't see mirrors. I didn't see black boys that were living their best life and were happy and going to play Xbox or playing basketball with their friends and eating ice cream. It was always like running from the police or escaping from something back in 1857, or you know what I mean, like that whole scene that I did in New Kid about the the book fair and why the
Hmm.
kids weren't interested in anything. So I really wanted to do something that was a bit more embracing of my so-called reluctant readers. I think
Hmm.
reluctant readers are just kids that haven't found that book yet. And for a lot of kids, I found out that, fortunately for me, New Kid is that book.
Yeah. And those like running from the police books, those are important to read, but there also needs to be books that like New Kid where they're just letting black kids be happy and like live their best life.
Yeah, and again, it's like, yes, they're important, but if that's every book,
Yeah.
like when I do school visits, I'll talk about, if the only books for girls were about a little girl who wanted to grow up and be a princess and
Hmm.
ride ponies all day, like if that's all you ever read, then it's like you almost limit yourself. You think, well, if I'm not a princess, I can't be anything. It's like, what if you want to be a Supreme Court justice or a nuclear
Hmm.
physicist or an MMA fighter or all three of those?
Yeah.
But not only does it affect you, but for the boys reading the books, if you're running for class president and they're like, well, Joseph is a boy and he wants to be president of the United States, but Elena, well, she probably just wants to be a princess, so she can't be a real leader. You know what I mean? Like that affects people's perceptions of you
Yeah.
as well. And I think that so many of the books with African American characters, especially the boys, it's gang life,
Hmm.
and either they want to be a rapper or be in a gang or play basketball, and it's the same things over and over and over. And it's like, listen, we're different. Like
Yeah.
I grew up born in Harlem, grew up in Washington Heights, and didn't like to read, and now end up winning the Newbery, the Coretta Scott King, and the Kirkus Prize.
Yeah.
So we're limitless. Like I didn't even know that I could have dreams as big as what my life is now. And
Hmm.
I think that a lot of kids, especially kids of color, don't think that they can have dreams that big because everyone basically tells them not to dream.
Hmm. So, yeah, that's really interesting. How did you get into reading and writing and become the author you are today if reading was a struggle?
Well, I always like to draw, so
Hmm.
I always wanted to make my own comic books. And in order to make my own comic books, I had to write my own stories. So I never really considered myself a writer, I guess, because I didn't like to read. So I didn't really consider writing my own comics as writing.
Hmm.
And I think that if I had a partner like back in high school who was a writer, I would have said, hey, you write them and I'll draw them. And I guess it kind of worked out that I didn't have someone like that. So I ended up writing my own stories, but I never thought that I would ever write a 250-page book because I never thought I would read a 250-page book. So you just never know sometimes what life has in store. Sometimes you get pushed to do something, you get forced into it, and then, you'll step up and you may even surprise yourself. Because I know I did, when I wrote my first 200-page book, I was like stunned. I had even asked a friend of mine to help me, and luckily he kept postponing it. So I just said, well, I'll write a chapter. I'll write another chapter. All right. And I was like, wait, I wrote 10 chapters. If I wrote 10, I could write 10 more. And then again, I was just as surprised writing a 250-page book as I was the first time when I read a 250-page book.
Well, several of my friends have read New Kid, including my friend Sophia. This question is from her and her mom. What kind of feedback do you get that shows how teens and tweens view race and the people around them?
I have gotten so much love. Like the email that I get, first of all, is I get like a bunch of different kinds. What the biggest one is either my son, my daughter, or a student in my class hates to read, has never read a book since I've known them. I just put New Kid down, and then almost like a little trap, like you put some cheese out for a mouse, and the kid comes and takes a nibble and takes a nibble, and next thing you know, they're like sitting down reading it, and they take a picture and send it to me. So that's the big one as far as the reluctant readers. Um, then I get other adults who say that their kids have read the book 10 times and they sobbed the first time because they had never seen a kid that looked like them in a book, or that, went through life like them. I have adults, the same thing, that is like, oh my goodness, that was my life. And I wish I had a book like this when I was 12, because it would have helped to show me that I'm not alone, that my experience, other people are sharing it. And it would have given me a little bit more strength and courage to step out a little bit. So I get really great feedback for that and Class Act. And I'm working on the third book now. So they have all the same characters that you love and maybe some that you don't love as much, but they're important to the story. Um, but yeah, so I'm very fortunate with the interaction I have with my fans.
I'm really excited for that third book. I'm definitely going to be reading it. Do you think that your books really especially resonate with Black boys?
Yeah, what's so funny is, um, I was always almost forced to believe that books with Black kids were only for Black readers, like I would do books and comic strips, and I would always have editors say, oh, well, people in the Midwest won't get the joke, or they won't appeal, it won't appeal to them. And, if you look behind me, these are New Kid and Spanish, French, Italian, Lithuanian, Romanian, Albanian, Korean. Um, so I'm just as surprised now that it's universal.
Hmm.
I do Zoom calls with schools that, I'm talking to kids in Italian with a translator, or I'm talking to kids from New Zealand. And that's just not something that I expected, because, again, they always just told me that books with Black kids were just very like in a box.
Hmm.
So yeah, it does definitely resonate with Black boys. uh Probably the most uh deep, but there are kids in Brazil that's like, wow, it changed my life because it will make me more empathetic and more open to meeting people outside of like my little box, my little world.
Hmm.
uh, so the fact that it is universal is just really pretty amazing to me.
Yeah, that is really cool. And it's awesome how much your book has made an impact on like not only Black boys, but like kind of people all over the world. I've been reading a lot and seeing news interviews about people wanting your books banned. It's
Hmm.
confusing to those of us who love your books. Can you help us understand what issues they may have with your books?
Yeah, so I had to kind of research it because I was kind of shocked by it. Um, because the people who are complaining, and it started in Texas, is one woman. I was doing a school visit, and she, I guess, for whatever reason, I think she felt like the book um, made the white kids in the book seem bad. So she didn't want her white daughter to feel guilty or like that she was villainized, that, all white kids were evil. And it's like, okay, every time you see the book, it's Jordan, Drew, and Liam, so they are the three, and Liam is white. So they're like best friends. So I'm definitely not showing that. Then they were like, well, you have like all the white kids were rich. Well, it's a very prestigious private school. So in order to afford the tuition, most times you're either wealthy to be able to afford that tuition or you're on financial aid. And I tried to balance it because if they had really taken the time to read the book, one of the kids whose family is the richest is Maury, who is black.
Hmm.
I talk about him having a villa in Italy, and his dad is the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Um, and then the one kid who was on financial aid who got in trouble was Colin, who is white. So
Hmm.
I took all the things that I thought people might complain about and made sure that I had things that kind of counteracted that. But
Hmm.
those same people, if it was like they were wanting to be fair to all kids, right? But
Yeah.
those same people never said anything where if you're in a class and the only books with black characters are about slavery or the struggle for civil rights, they're not caring about you. They don't care that you feel uncomfortable. If
Yeah.
you're one of the few black kids in your class, and then it's like, oh, okay, everyone, we're going on the bus ride to, some museum, and they're like, oh, you have to sit on the back of the bus. You're black, you know, like that happened to me. That happened to my kids. It happens to lots of kids of color. So where's the protection for those kids? So if it was saying, hey, let's come up with a curriculum where we're fair to everyone and we want to be as conscious and protective of our kids of color as we are for our white students, then that's one thing. But to just all of a sudden be like, oh, you know my daughter's uncomfortable, it's like, okay, well, what about everyone else's sons and daughters?
Hmm.
So to remove all of the LGBTQ books and, books about Martin Luther King and then even books with New Kid where there's no gangs, there's no cursing, all the stuff that they claim with other books. There's no bad language, there's no nothing, and by showing these African American kids on the same level and as smart as and as good as the white kids in their school, I think that's kind of the underlying thing that is making them upset. But they cover it up in order to make it seem like it's something else. But it's my life, so how are you going to tell me what my experience is and your experience and my son's experience, you know um so that's what's really kind of that's uh the most depressing or disgusting, whatever word you want to use. Part of that is that they're not really looking out for all kids. They just want, their particular kid,
Hmm.
and, all parents should have the right of what their kids want to read, or should read or can read. But if you don't want anyone else's kid to read it because you don't want your kid, And then the last thing on that is I've never actually gotten complaints from kids.
Yeah.
This is the parents that are saying their kid doesn't want to read it. And it's like, your kid is probably sneaking behind the library and reading this book, and texting their friends, oh my goodness, I read New Kid, it's so funny. But for them not to be able to pick anything about it, not, oh, it's humorous, oh, it teaches empathy. It's just that, oh, this book is evil. It just shows that they haven't really read it and they just make up stuff about it.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't really understand like why people would ban books. Um, it just, especially books like New Kid, where, like you said, there isn't swearing or gangs. It's just like a funny book about like that teaches kids about empathy, and they're trying to twist it to make it seem like their kid is kind of feeling, I guess, guilty and stuff.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And the weird thing is, so they don't ban my books. It's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? They don't
Hmm.
ban my books because I write stories like this. I write stories like this because they ban my books. You know what I mean? Like, everything that I always do, um, there are people that will find problems with that.
Yeah.
When you look at what, in theory, an American success story is, you start here, you work your way up, you pull yourself by your bootstraps, you do this, you do this, you do it. So I was a young Black boy from Harlem, middle class family, didn't like to read, ends up, making their own comics, do my own comic strip, self publishing my own books, publishing other people's books, became an independent publisher, illustrated a book for Scholastic, and then did this book that is the only book in history to win the Newbery, the Coretta Scott King, and the Kirkus Prize. And I'm like, why isn't that like, you know, uh, a movie of the week, or a Disney Channel movie, you know? But instead, it's like, now I'm a villain. So that just goes to show how unfair it is. And there are people that just don't want a level playing field.
Right. Well, I'm really inspired by your work and how you kind of like were like a young kid from like in Washington Heights, and you kind of like became this like renowned author. What piece of advice do you give to budding writers like me?
Well, and going back to the last question, that's probably the other problem is now I'm inspiring kids like you, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, there's going to be more Jerry Crafts, you know, telling their own stories, so that's the thing. It's like, for the writers and artists, number one, have fun doing it. Okay. Don't
Hmm.
put so much pressure on yourself where you can't finish it, because so many young artists and authors start a story or start a drawing, and the first thing is, oh, it's no good, you know, uh, I'm just going to give up. And they have just sketchbooks that just half finished, and they never finish it. The drawings that they never completed, the stories that they never completed. So, one, relax, let yourself have some fun. But then, just because it is fun doesn't mean that there's not work. So, with me, I always say that it's not about the writing or the drawing as much as it is the rewriting and the redrawing. Because there are times when I have a page that is done and I go, oh man, I should have had them do this instead. And I really don't want to redraw it. But if I know it's going to make it better, then if I have to start from scratch and redraw it, I will, because I want a book that will resonate with you.
Hmm.
That when you read it, it's like, oh, that's like me and Sophie, or that's like me and this one, or this is like my cousin, or this is like me. And that's the kind of stuff that, I wanted to give out to you, but also, to inspire you to tell your own stories. You
Hmm.
know, like, people will say, oh, you should do one about a young Black girl. Now, I'm like, I didn't grow up as a young Black girl,
Hmm.
so I couldn't have the nuances and the detail that I did with Jordan. Like, yes, I have female characters, Alexandra and Ashley and Ruby, but I don't know what it's like to be a 12-year-old girl or a 13-year-old girl.
Mhm.
And to be honest, I would rather leave that to you to tell your story so you could teach me, as opposed to me trying to make it up. And I'm only be going from, you know, books that I read, like, oh, well, in Raina Telgemeier's book, she had little girls think like this. So I'm going to do that. I don't want to copy someone else's stuff, so I really
Mhm.
want to kind of stay in my lane and do what I do well, and then leave those other stories for other people to tell their stories.
Yeah. Well, you did say that you were working on a third book. You probably can't say a lot about it, but is there something that you can kind of hint at?
Yeah, so all of the characters are back, all the
Mhm.
main characters. Um, and this one will be more of an ensemble cast, meaning where you'll get to see more, because that's the thing. Um, I had is even though Drew was on the cover of Class Act,
Mhm.
I feel like I had as much about Liam
Yeah.
as I did about Drew. Like, you got to see Liam's house and his relationship with his dad and Mr. Pierre and his sister and his brother. So there was a lot about Liam. So I didn't want to make a book just on him because I think you saw a lot about him. But the more kids who I talk to, they're like, oh, can I see more about Alexandra? Or can I see more about Ramon? Or can I see more about Maury? Or can I see more about Andy? And, you know, so this next book will be more of everyone. You'll still
Mhm.
see Jordan, Joe, and Liam, but you'll get to see a lot more of Maury and Ramon and, some of the other characters that kind of were in the background of the first two books.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to finish it. My deadline is like May 20th, and I draw until about 3 o'clock in the morning every night, including last night. And then I get up, and as soon as we stop our interview, I will get a glass of water and I will start drawing today. And I will probably draw another 16 hours today
Oh my gosh.
in order to make my deadline. And then it should be out next year about this time, is what we're shooting for.
That's going to be really exciting. I can't wait to read it.
Me too.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I wanted to let everyone know that I will be giving away both New Kid and Class Act on my on my blog on Friday. And thank you again for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. I just want to show you two more quick things. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things, also, one of my goals and dreams is, because I never saw kids of color on like regular stuff that you can get at the stores and things. So, look, this is a New Kid jigsaw puzzle.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yep,
so cool.
450 pieces that just came out. And look, you got the whole cast on there,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty cool. I love seeing that. And then this is a New Kid sketchbook,
Ooh.
again, which is, I just absolutely love having. And then Spring Hill Entertainment, which is a movie production company owned by LeBron James and Maverick Carter, signed me, and we're partnering with Universal Pictures to make a live action New Kid movie.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, so that's like the big news. So that's your
Yeah.
like breaking news kind of thing. Yep, live action movie. So it'll take a few years because I just saw like the treatment of it, and I think it should be really, really pretty cool.
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting.
So congratulations to you. Happy 4-year anniversary, and I
Thank
appreciate you
you.
and all your hard work as well.
Thank you. And thank you so much for writing New Kid and giving people like a chance to see themselves in your books.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Bye bye.